It was a beautiful morning on March 24, 2015, as Germanwings Flight 9525 prepared for takeoff from Barcelona El Prat Airport. The Airbus A320, with 144 passengers and 6 crew members, was scheduled to fly to Düsseldorf, a routine flight that would soon become one of the most haunting chapters in aviation history. As the aircraft taxied down the runway and ascended into the clear skies, a calm settled over the cabin. The captain, 34-year-old Patrick Sondenheimer, and the co-pilot, 27-year-old Andreas Lubitz, were both seasoned pilots. Patrick had nearly 7,000 hours of flying experience and was known as a reliable and skilled captain. Andreas, on the other hand, was relatively new to Germanwings, having joined after completing years of rigorous training. By all accounts, it was set to be a routine flight, like countless others they'd both flown. But what no one knew was that this day would shatter lives and leave the world in disbelief. As the flight reached its cruising altitude, the captain briefly left the cockpit for a routine break. "I'm going to the bathroom. Can you take over radio communications?" he asked Andreas. "Yes, sure," the co-pilot replied casually. But in that brief moment, everything changed. As soon as the captain stepped out, Andreas locked the cockpit door behind him. Calmly, he reached for the altitude selector and adjusted the setting down to a chilling 100 feet, effectively setting the aircraft on a course to descend into the mountains. This action echoed oddities seen in a previous flight where Lubitz had briefly dialed the altitude down, but this time there would be no recovery. The aircraft began its deadly descent, dropping thousands of feet per minute, while the passengers and crew remained unaware. The autopilot had been programmed to descend, and the speed of the aircraft increased as it plummeted toward the ground. The smooth ride was now rapidly turning into a nightmare, though only Andreas knew the full scope of what was happening. Germanwings 9525, Marseille Control Center. What cruise level were you cleared for? The urgency in the air traffic controller's voice was palpable, but the only sound from the cockpit was Andreas's calm breathing. Repeated attempts to contact the aircraft went unanswered. As Marseille Control tried again and again, silence from the cockpit painted a horrifying picture. Back in the cabin, passengers remained unaware of the impending tragedy. Meanwhile, Captain Sondenheimer returned from the bathroom and quickly realized he was locked out of the cockpit. Alarmed, he knocked on the door. "Open the door! Open the door!" he shouted, but Andreas remained silent. His breathing, barely audible over the radio, was calm and controlled, unsettlingly so. Desperation set in as Patrick pounded on the door. His shouts grew more frantic as he realized the gravity of the situation. With each passing second, the reality of the situation became clearer. Passengers started to sense the unease, watching as the captain tried in vain to regain control. Their confusion soon turned to fear as the aircraft continued its rapid descent. Germanwings 9525, Marseille Control Center, please respond. Still no answer. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ominous alarms blaring in the cockpit. The aircraft plunged through the clouds, with the French Alps coming into view, a jagged mountainous terrain that spelled certain doom. As the ground grew closer, the warning systems blared loudly. "Terrain ahead! Pull up! Terrain ahead!" But no action was taken. Andreas had set the speed to a maximum that made recovery impossible. The ground was coming up fast, and the passengers' confusion quickly turned to terror. The moment of impact came at 10:41 a.m. Germanwings Flight 9525 slammed into the mountainside at high speed, obliterating the aircraft and leaving a trail of devastation. All 150 souls on board were lost, including 16 school children on an exchange trip, their young lives tragically cut short. Rescue efforts were immediately launched, but the crash site was remote and difficult to reach, nestled in the rugged French Alps. When rescuers finally arrived, the scene was grim. There were no survivors. In the days that followed, the world mourned. Vigils were held in Germany, Spain, and France, with grieving families releasing balloons, one for each of the victims. As investigators pieced together the evidence, a disturbing truth came to light. Andreas Lubitz had been battling severe depression, with a history of mental health struggles that he had concealed from his employer. Despite being deemed unfit to fly by his doctors, he kept his condition hidden from the airline, allowing him to take the controls of Flight 9525 on that fateful day. The tragedy raised difficult questions about mental health in aviation and how such an unthinkable act could have been prevented. The world was left grappling with the heartbreak and horror of what had transpired. A routine flight turned into a nightmare, leaving behind a legacy of sorrow that will never be forgotten. What are your thoughts on this? Comment below. And if you want to know what happened to an airplane that lost its roof at 24,000 feet, click here, and I'll see you in the next minute.